Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Sobchak-Bankard, and I'm here with a friend who also did not go to Park City, Utah last weekend, to my knowledge. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
It's going well. I didn't go there. I will say for my opening quote, I was trying to look up something from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. There's really no, all the memorable lines are exchanges. So I was going to go with...
so there's no one-liners. Yeah.
I was going to go with Butch and me have been talking it all over. Wherever the hell Bolivia is, that's where we're off to. Which makes sense in the context of the movie, and Sundance does say that. But I feel like if I just threw that at you as the opening thing, you would be like, what? And the audience would also...
I would have assumed it was a Robert Redford reference, founder of Sundance.
Yes, it was.
Sundance Film Festival.
The Sundance Kid, the titular character.
Right. So, and noticeably, this may be jumping the gun because I haven't even finished our intro yet. But I noticed that he is not featured in the intros anymore.
Yeah, maybe he's just taking a step back.
Okay, so the Sundance Film Festival, which is what we've been just out of context bantering about, just wrapped up, and PT and I, as we said, were not able to attend in person. But we did take advantage of some of the online screenings on offer. So we are here today to share our reviews of the films that we saw. I think between the two of us, it's probably like 10 total, maybe? I didn't get an exact number.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 7 because we overlapped quite a bit. We each saw 5.
Okay, there we go. And then we'll do a little bit to start with. We'll do a little bit of talk about the buzz coming out of the in-person festival. And then go into our own reactions to the movies that we actually got to see online. And, there were some breakout hits. There were some misses, apparently. And I'm excited to talk about it all. But first, PT, if folks want to give us the Sundance Audience Award after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Oh, so clever. That one worked for me. I like that. Well, look, if you don't want to miss out on a trip to our own personal park cities, please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. That's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Google Podcast, I think is one that I looked up, and we are on it. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, so you could also follow her over there. And you can follow us if you're more meta-minded on Instagram and or Threads at the Long Take Review.
Thanks, PT. So we're going to get into a little bit of sort of reviewing the reviews coming out of Sundance. This is very secondhand. This is the best secondhand information you're going to get about Sundance. It's all right here. But first, I think we should give a little bit of context, especially for those who are not familiar with the Sundance Film Festival. It is a really big festival that happens every year, and it mostly focuses on indie films, or that's what it's kind of known for. But what has been great, and the reason kind of I've gotten more into it, is when the pandemic started, they moved the whole festival to online. And then I was like, this is amazing. Like, it's something I would never be able to go to normally. I can now watch some of these movies from home. And I've been doing it ever since. And after they returned to in-person, unfortunately, for those of us who like watching at home, they started to sort of separate the slate. So it's some of the movies were in person only, mostly the sort of big premieres that were not in competition. But then they kept all of the in competition films to online for the most part. So, it is a little strategic on their part in terms of like the bigger movies that are not just competing in the festival, but like actually want to sort of like make a splash, are limiting to in person. I get it, but it makes it a little less. I don't know if this is how you feel, but it's just a little less exciting. The first year when they had everything online, I really felt like I was in it.
Yeah, that first year it was really just what can you get tickets for, because they did still limit, and they do still now as well. A couple of the movies did sell out. They limit sort of how many people can get a ticket to watch it online. And that first year was just everything. Everything is possible. You just needed a friend like Jen to be like, hey, this is a thing that's happening. Like, why don't why don't you go and look and see what movies you want to watch? And I remember missing, I think Judas and the Black Messiah is like the one I didn't get. I wanted tickets for, and that was already sold out by the time I got
Right.
there. But yeah, it's shifted. I feel like it's partly the, like, who's in competition, who's not. I think it's also any movie that's not in competition that already has distribution is like that. That feels to me like the sweet spot for it will only be in person. They already have a distributor with plans, and those plans may not involve however many tens or hundreds or thousands. I don't know how many can buy these tickets, but a bunch of people watching it at home online for money that goes to Sundance and doesn't go to a box office total. So the big one last year, that was, the I think, looking back as it stands, the only one that has a real impact in the current Oscar race was Past Lives. That was, I don't know if it was a premiere there, like a global premiere. I know it was the American premiere, and but immediately it was just like, this movie is incredible. Like the build up to it was strong, and then it as soon as it screened, everyone was like, oh my god, for reasons that those who listen to the podcast will know, we all feel similarly. But that was not available online, much to our consternation. So yeah, there was a similar divide between what could be seen in person versus what can be seen at home.
Yeah, I had serious FOMO last year when everyone was talking. All the critics that we follow were talking about Past Lives, and I'm like, well, I couldn't even see that. It's really, it really bummed me out. But we got to see it eventually in basket its glow, and so that's fine. I actually, yeah, I had pretty good luck because I am a maniac who like is really good at refreshing pages, so I can buy tickets exactly when it opens, and so I actually saw Coda, which went on to win Best Picture at its Sundance premiere virtually. I remember sitting on my bed with my laptop on my lap and just like crying and being really angry about it. That's my memory of watching Coda at Sundance virtually. And then yeah, I actually did see Judas and the Black Messiah as well, and I remember thinking like, whoa, like they is this going to have an Oscars campaign? And sure enough, it kind of did. It was sort of like a last minute. I remember like we were because it didn't actually premiere or release widely until like the week of the Oscars. It was some really weird
Well,
timing.
it
Do you
was the
remember?
pandemic year where it had that tail of movies in January and February also counted, and it
Oh, that's
came
right.
out, even the limited release, I feel like, was late January,
Yeah.
or it was after New Year's, and so it felt weird that it was like, I guess this is in the running, but Daniel Kaluuya won an Oscar for it, and I think the song won, I think Her, which yeah, I mean, excellent movie. I really like that movie.
So we're gonna first start with talking about sort of the buzz coming out of the in-person festival, all the movies that we didn't get to see ourselves, but because we are closely following critics through our reviews and podcasts and all that kind of stuff. What seem to be the things that we're gonna need to keep an eye out for when they do release to the rest of us. Um, PT, what to you was kind of the biggest winner coming out of the in-person festival?
I feel like the movie that was getting the most buzz was Dee Dee, which is a coming of age movie set in 2008, and it's oh no, I didn't save the name of the person who actually wrote and directed it, but
Is it
uh,
Sean? I think it's Sean Wang. I
okay.
want to say, but
I will let Jen look it up while
I'll look
I
it up.
just keep barreling forward with the notes I did have. And it's about like a Taiwanese American family and this 13-year-old boy that's the fill in for the writer, and him coming of age over a summer and trying to figure out how to talk to girls and navigate like his grandmother and all these things. And everyone just said it was super charming. It had that specificity of a sort of the Asian American experience in a family at that time. That the MySpace vibes were very strong. The instant messenger, sort of the tail end of the instant messenger era. That those sounds, it was a lot of nostalgia
Yeah,
bumps in it, and yeah, people just said that like everyone who went to go see it just was raving about it, and it
right.
won the audience award, which is pretty substantial. I feel like in doing a quick glimpse of the Sundance roster of winners, the audience award tends to be the movie that I was like, oh, that I've seen that movie. That movie made a splash when it actually came out, more so than the grand jury dramatic prize winner,
Right.
which can sometimes be a little bit more obscure.
Coda, in fact, Best Picture winner Coda, was the audience award winner for that year. So
there you go.
There is definitely a correlation. And I think the year after that was, have you seen Cha Cha Real Smooth? A movie that no one cared about after it came out.
I never did. It felt like that was a movie people were really talking about, and then it came out, and immediately, like, everyone who didn't see it at Sundance was like, "This isn't good," and
expectations were too high, I guess.
Yes, and then it deflated. I think there's a particular sort of vibe that movie was going for. I remember a fellow long take reviewer, Antonio Elefano, had a very strong opinion about it, and I honestly can't remember if he loved it or hated it. But I feel like he didn't like it because I remember hearing from him about it, and then I haven't watched it. So I think if he loved it, I would have gone to watch it.
I thought it was good, and what I learned from that year was the Dakota Johnson stands are not to be trifled with. Because I think I remember it was back when Twitter was still like somewhat functional, and I remember tweeting something and doing hashtag Dakota Johnson, or I said something complimentary about Dakota Johnson because she was quite good in the film, and then just like I was like, this is the most popular tweet I've ever written, like why? And then I looked and I was like, oh, it's like all of the people with Dakota Johnson in their account name, just retweeting it, and I was like, oh, now I understand. So that was interesting.
I will say, looking back at my at the Wikipedia page of Sundance Film Festival winners, I will say for the last decade at least, maybe I should walk back a little bit. The audience award winner is better. There's been a lot of overlap where the grand jury prize and the audience winner is the same, and that, you know, generally memorable movies: Fruitvale Station, Whiplash, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. With the Birth of a Nation that kind of ran aground, had some problems, and then Minari is the one before Coda. Minari won both, as did Coda. So yeah, you know, and those were both Best Picture nominees. Coda a winner, Minari got a acting award. So, you know, these there's something from the Sundance competition that can get you into. I'm presaging Oscar watch.
Yes,
to say
good. That's good.
There's some energy
setup
here. Jen, how about you? What did you hear about Dee Dee, or if we want to pivot, what other movies have you heard about?
So what's really, I just want to add about Dee Dee is that was actually one of the ones in competition and therefore was available online. We just didn't know when we were buying tickets that was one we should be trying to watch. And so, so it's just funny because it's like we're talking about it like it was only in person because of the buzz that it got, but we just slept on it. We didn't know.
Well, yeah. Once the first in-person screening happened, the buzz immediately was just like, this is incredible. And I went, like, I feel like not long afterwards, and it was sold out. Like, I think whatever tickets were still there. And again, there were maybe like a quarter or a fifth of the movies sold out. So, you know, whatever tickets were still there got snapped up as soon as the buzz hit.
I almost got one when I was buying my tickets originally, but I was trying to gauge just how many movies I realistically could watch in like 3 or 4 days. And it almost made the cut. It would have been probably the next one on my list. And I just cut myself off. Was like, I can't buy all of these movies and then only watch like half of them. That's not wise, financially, but also kind of a waste because someone else could have been using that spot, right? Because they do limit the online screenings. But yeah, so I'm excited to see this one. Coming of age movies are are a staple of Sundance. Like, that's sort of what the festival is sort of known for. A stereotypical Sundance movie is usually a coming of age story. Mm-hmm. And I think I remember hearing a podcaster who was at the festival in person sort of saying that, like, in the Q&A or in an interview or something that Sean Wang was doing, where he said, you know, Sundance has such a rich tradition of coming of age movies. I really wanted to add to that canon sort of by offering this Taiwanese American experience and the perspective that he didn't see in the genre. So that's cool. I like that idea of adding to the genre, adding new perspectives to an old genre. So, well, I guess, what is a movie that we couldn't see that had a lot of buzz? I would say the one I heard people talking about and praising the most was I Saw the TV Glow, which is an A24 film, and I still don't totally understand what it is. But it's like kids that it's a lot of social media commentary apparently, right? And then like the kids, the TV show becomes real or something. I don't know. PT, help me out here.
Yeah, I mean, well, again, I'm just looking at the Wikipedia premise. I think it was the NPR summary was that basically it's like Buffy fans who become friends, and then like something weird happens with the line between reality and fantasy of this TV show they love. Which, yeah, the Wikipedia summary is two teenagers bond over their love of a television series. After it is mysteriously canceled, their reality begins to blur.
Right. That sounds like it's trying not to spoil the movie. So I guess
Yes.
we'll just have to wait and see. The commentary, spoiler-free commentary I kept hearing from critics, though, was that it had a lot to say about pop culture and fandom and social media and sort of online communities. So that sounded really interesting to me. So I'm definitely going to check that one out when it comes out.
Yeah, and the director is Jane Schoenbrunn, who directed, of course, now I can't, here we go. We're All Going to the World's Fair. I had one of those Wikipedia pop-up things that was blocking the one piece of the screen I needed. For the movie title of We're All Going to the World's Fair, which was a Sundance movie a couple of years ago that I think was one that it was like, this could be good. And then there either weren't tickets online or I was too late. I wake up later than Jen, so Jen's there at like whatever it is, 7 or 8 in the morning, and I'm stumbling in at 9:30. Like, what's happening?
You got to remember it's mountain time.
I know.
That's the thing that messes everybody up.
Well, and what day it is, and also just like the fact that it's that day. Anyway, it got some buzz. I think it was a little. There were some people who really didn't like it, and some people who really did. But yeah, I don't know. So an interesting filmmaker who's gotten some Sundance attention and buzz before. So yeah, I'm interested in that one too. There was a lot of really positive comments about it.
Is there a couple more, one or two more we want to give a shout out to, and then we should move into our own reviews?
I think so. I'm just going to throw out there that there's a movie called The Outrun, which stars Saoirse Ronan, and it's supposed to be a very strong acting performance from her. Someone who obviously isn't at the like Amy Adams, Annette Bening, Glenn Close stage yet, but has had a ton of Oscar nominations and not won yet. So any movie with her, it's sort of like that could be something. Even Foe was getting attention for a little while before people saw it and didn't like it. So The Outrun is based on a memoir. It's a woman who is trying to recover from her substance abuse problems, moves to the Orkney Islands in Scotland, and it's sort of just trying to following her life as she tries to heal and recover. And people who saw it kept talking about just like weeping openly and crying a lot, and that it was very moving. So that's something to look out for. And the other one I will mention on the documentary side is a movie called Daughters, which not only won the U.S. documentary competition, it also won the Festival Favorite Award. It's a documentary about daughters trying to stay in touch with their fathers who are incarcerated. And apparently that was the hit documentary of like, everyone was like, yes, this one is the one to go and see. And as we will talk about a little later on.
Yeah, don't spoil Oscars watch.
Documentaries out of Sundance are something you got to pay attention to. How about you, Jen? What was there something else you wanted to note?
So the one that probably hurt the most that I couldn't see based just on the pure description and who's involved in it was Presence, Steven Soderbergh's newest movie. And it's Steven Soderbergh doing a haunted house, like the house. Right. You wrote in the notes, POV of the ghost. People were very confusing because they were trying not to spoil this movie when they were talking about it. And it has Lucy Liu in it.
Yes.
Right. I'm a big fan of hers. I'm a big proponent of my hot take is that Elementary was better than Sherlock, which no one agrees with. But that's a deliberately hot take, but I stand by it. Later seasons of Sherlock in particular. I feel like
my dad agrees with you, and my mom says it's because he has a crush on Lucy Liu, but he also thinks Elementary is a better adaptation of Sherlock.
Yeah. That is what I should specify. It's not just it's not necessarily a better show, right? Like I enjoy Sherlock a lot. But if you are being a nerd and pushing up your glasses about adapting the original text, then I do think that Elementary is a better adaptation of the character and some of the story. So anyway, this is not a Sherlock podcast. We can do that another time.
Spinoff.
Yes, it's been a but yeah, my yeah, that's my last shout out because I'm glad that people liked it. I'm relieved because I was like, that sounds so cool. I love Steven Soderbergh. He's always doing interesting stuff. Love Lucy Liu. Like love a good. I'm not a horror person, but I do love a good ghost story. And so I was like, oh, if this isn't too scary, like this is something I might really like. And so I'm glad that people were putting the stamp of approval on it.
I also just want to note Steven Soderbergh having a positive reaction to one of his movies at Sundance. Tried and true, like when Sundance was really finding its feet and started both the pivot into being the center of at the forefront of the 90s indie cinema movement, and also starting to get more attention to the movies, for awards consideration, was when Sex, Lies, and Videotape, one of Steven Soderbergh's early, if not his first movie, won the aforementioned Audience Award in 1989. So it's a big part of his career and also a big part of Sundance history. So nice that he's back with another small movie that we cannot understand from the logline description. But I look forward
what
to
it
seeing.
Actually is.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what actually happens here.
Yeah, this one Neon picked up, so it will eventually, it'll be in theaters, but eventually will be on Hulu. Usually, that's where Neon stuff ends up. So, yeah, exciting. I'll keep an eye out for that one for sure. All right, let's get into movies we actually saw. I'm getting a little prickly, being like all these cool movies we didn't get to see. So I want to talk about things we actually did see. So what we're gonna do is just sort of hop back and forth. We are gonna start with our favorites loosely and sort of work our way down as we kind of hop back and forth and ping pong our different picks that we want to talk about. PT, why don't you go first? What was your favorite Sundance movie that you saw?
My favorite of the 5 that I saw, and I'm not alone in this house for having it up at the top, was Thelma, which was a movie directed by Josh Margolin, and it's a movie about a 92 or 93-year-old grandmother who gets caught like in a scam, not a phishing scam, but you got to send us money right away. And so she goes and sends money. And then once she realizes it was a scam and that she's been had, sets off on a quest to get the money back from the people who did it. This movie was wonderful. As someone who, likes nice sort of family interactions. I mean, I don't mean nice meaning like everyone's happy, but well written, well executed, and really sort of getting at some of the nuances and strife within a mostly otherwise loving and content family, but the things that can easily sort of rile up in that, combined with the tropes, playing off of the tropes of action movies. We're going to do our best, obviously not spoil anything. Who knows when these movies will be available? I don't think it's a spoiler to say that in the very early stages of the movie, she is watching Mission Impossible Fallout with her grandson, who's trying to explain what the Tom Cruise dynamic of he does all these stunts, and that is part of her inspiration for just like, well, I can go out and do this. So that's a great marriage to tell a story that's fundamentally about aging and growing old, and sort of what are the things that you can do anymore, and who are the people who are still in your life, and how do you respond and react to loss when you're in a position where you have lost a lot of people around you. So June Squibb, who I immediately think of as from the Alexander Payne movie Nebraska, but she's been in a bunch of things. She is the aforementioned titular Thelma, and her friend, her elderly friend, is Richard Roundtree, the late great Richard Roundtree, in what I believe is his last performance, and they're just absolutely incredible together. Parker Posey and Clark Gregg are the daughter and son-in-law. And
they're so neurotic. It's amazing.
Yes. and Malcolm McDowell, of course. I was thinking it's not Michael. Why don't I have Michael in my head? Malcolm McDowell is in the movie as well as another senior citizen. So yeah, it's just really great. It was really heartwarming, and one of those movies where it was like, as and honestly, I'll say this is true for a bunch of the ones that I saw and liked. There were a lot of moments where I was just like, this is really fun. This is going to fall apart soon, though. Like, this is going to, it's going to make a mistake and going to become either too maudlin or go like too extreme or kind of lose any momentum. And it really never did. So I had a great time. And as I said in my Letterboxd review, the campaign for awards nominations for June Squibb and Richard Roundtree begin here. So, let's get this movie released and let's get them some, at least like an Independent Spirit Award or something, if not all the way to Oscars. So you saw this as well, Jen. What did you think
I
about that
did.
movie?
So I also really enjoyed this. I thought it was definitely one of the funniest movies, or like had the longest stretches of like I'm just cackling at what's happening, and it's really nice, and maybe the cutest movie I saw, and because it has that sort of like big heart to it, because you're rooting for June Squibb the whole time, and you're just like, is she gonna do it? Is she gonna do it? And like, to be clear, like some of the highest like points of tension is she's slowly like rolling across a bed like to get up. It's like it's amazing. Like
Yeah, well, one of the things I was afraid of, and I hope no one thinks this is a spoiler. One of the things I was afraid of was it was going to get hyper realistic. She was going to like somehow turn into John Wick or Ethan Hunt, but like it's always a 93-year-old woman and what a 93-year-old woman can do, but presented as
yes,
this like huge action sequence because it would be for someone of that age.
which is very funny. My only and this is barely a critique, just something I was kind of wondering about as I was watching it, and kind of was secretly wanting from it, was to lean more into having the sort of cinematic style and the camera work be closer to what an actual action movie would be like. I think that would have been super fun, but then maybe could have taken away from the the sort of like quiet indie film part of this, right? Because at the end of the day, this is about a woman reflecting on aging and whether like what it means to be that old, and can she still be independent and all those sorts of things. And so I maybe I shouldn't be wishing for that, but that was the thing. I was like, oh, wouldn't it be really cool if they had just like really doubled down on shooting this as if like still doing the thing you're saying of presenting her movement and abilities as realistic, but just that the camera is sort of like
Mm-hmm.
doing it more, because I feel like the way it's shot is still more or less still kind of a quiet Sundance indie movie. So that was the only thing that I thought left me wanting. But otherwise, like I really loved the dynamic between June Squibb and Richard Roundtree, who I don't remember if you mentioned this earlier, is the original Shaft. So when I realized that, because I was like, why does he look so familiar? Then I looked it up and I was like, whoa, he's Shaft. No wonder he's so cool. I just thought they were a really great pair. And I think the movie doesn't work if they don't spend the amount of time they do together. You know what I mean? Like, I think that the June Squibb's character, Thelma, needed the, his character's name, Richard Roundtree's character's
Oh,
name.
it's
Do you remember?
Ben.
Oh,
Like
Ben. Thank
many
you.
other movies that we watched, it was a character named Ben.
Oh, that's true. Lots of Bens. Yeah. So I think like he was a really good counterbalance to her character, and I just loved watching the two of them together. So I'm not saying no to the dual Oscars campaign for this film, though I will say though it got picked up by Magnolia, and I was sort of doing a little bit more digging on the movies they do, and they don't really have big Oscar plays usually, or like they just don't have big movies in general. Like I think the only Oscar player they've ever had is Shoplifters, which was an international feature nominee. So I mean that doesn't mean I'm not counting it out, right? Well, I'm spoiling our Oscars watch conversation, but I'm not counting it out. But I'm just saying like we should manage our expectations in terms of what the release of this movie looks like.
Yeah,
Realistically,
I'm scrolling through the history of Magnolia Pictures releases, and it's not a lot of movies I recognize. So,
yeah. If
Man on Wire, that won an
okay,
Oscar.
I don't
I,
know.
I agree. The one thing I will say in not even pushback, but just as an alternative, is this might be Magnolia Pictures' only play.
Oh,
Whereas if Thelma was bought by a Searchlight, by a Neon or A24 or Sony Classics, like it might end up being the fifth, sixth, seventh priority.
that's fair.
And then then where are we? Like, that's no good. But yeah, that's mostly hopium. That's mostly me just wanting to believe this little movie will have something. We'll kick off in some way. But yeah, it was charming, and it was the movie that from this festival that it was just sort of like, oh, like I could see a ton of people I know who only watch 10 movies a year choosing to watch this movie and being happy they did, which may not be the case for most Sundance movies. No disrespect
Yeah.
to Sundance.
Yeah. I think this is probably the biggest crowd pleaser on our list,
Yeah,
I would say.
agreed.
So, yeah. And actually, I looked it up, and the place Magnolia Films usually end up streaming is Peacock. Apparently, I
Hey,
can't, like, I didn't find, like, I couldn't, like, corroborate that in multiple sources. It was like one or two articles that were like, Magnolia Pictures makes a deal with Peacock. So I think that's, if we had to guess, that's where it would end up. But because I know we have folks that like to wait for things to go
of
on
course.
streaming when they watch them. So all right, that means I'm up for my favorite movie. So my favorite film was actually the first one that I saw, and so I didn't realize it was my favorite at the time. And in retrospect, I'm like, oh, this really suffered. This my review of this really did suffer from it being the first movie, and me being like, well, I gotta wait because I'm sure there's gonna be something else that comes along that's better, and there really wasn't for me. So it's a real pain, which is uh, are you
It just
surprised that
sounded
I
like you
picked
were
it?
like, it's a real pain when you
I
watch
know.
a movie first. But yeah, you mean the movie title
I mean,
is
the
a
movie
real
title is
pain.
a real pain. Yes. Well, I mean, the title of the movie is a play on one of the characters in the movie, played by Kieran
Yes.
Culkin. This is Jesse Eisenberg's second directorial outing, I guess is the best way to say. I don't know. I'm like, what's the noun there? Um, Directorship? No, that's not what it is.
Second time
Th-
directing.
okay, let's try this. This is the second film that Jesse Eisenberg has directed. There we go. And his first film was, I'm gonna forget the title, and that word, it's
It's
not.
like when you're done saving the world, or when you're finished saving the
Yeah,
world.
that sounds right. And it was with Julianne Moore and Wolf Finn Wolfhard,
Finn.
the Stranger
Yeah.
Things kid,
Yes. It
right?
is when
Okay,
you finish saving the world, and it
okay,
is Finn Wolfhard.
yeah.
And it
And I
was
was,
it was at the 2022 Sundance Film Festival,
yeah,
and it was not great in my
it was not.
opinion.
It was not. It was fine, but it was very kind of like whiny and sort of like self-absorbed in a way that I just wasn't really on. I didn't get on board with it. And so it was really, really nice to be surprised that this film was very much not that, and it seemed like much more kind of self-assured. This feels like a lot more of a personal film, which it is, like in the little. So the nice thing about the online screenings is you still get the sort of, it's being recorded over Zoom, but you still get the sort of director or the creators behind the film introducing it, and then you get to see the Q&A that happened in the in-person screening at the end. And so that was really, I thought this one had the best sort of, preamble and Q&A, because it was Jesse Eisenberg talking about, they filmed in Poland, in all the places that his actual real life grandmother grew up. And so, like, the film, so I should say what it's about. The film is about these two cousins. It's Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin, and they're sort of estranged. Like, you can tell that they haven't, like, really kept in touch, but their grandmother in her will left them money to go to Poland, where she was a survivor of the Holocaust, to take a trip and see sort of where she was from after she died. So the movie is sort of like a buddy road trip kind of movie, and but with like very sad, sort of tragic world history built into it, and just the dynamic between the two of them was incredibly funny. And so it feels like a personal story, and I feel like, to not to take it to teacher town, but like, when I read some student papers, like, sometimes you can just tell the writing is something that the student actually cares about. Like, you can just tell, because it's better, it's more interesting, they seem more invested in it, it's less robotic, right? And so I felt like that's sort of the difference between Jesse Eisenberg's first film and this film. This film just feels so much more like grounded in real emotions as opposed to intellectual ideas, which I think is what the When You Finish Saving the World sort of suffered from a little bit. It had like a concept that was very clearly important, but like no heart to it. And so this is the exact opposite. And so I just really enjoyed it. And it really tied together the sort of like family history pain, right? So the title is a play on pain, right? Because Kieran Culkin, who is just like giving this like transcendent performance, like it's just like really, really good. My Letterboxd review said that his performance sort of outgrew the movie a little bit. Like it feels like he's kind of overshadowing it, but that's sort of what his character does everywhere he goes too. So maybe that's intentional, but it's a play on he's a real pain, like he's kind of a difficult person to be around, but it's also about sort of this generational pain. And the movie is very good about talking about like, well, how do we as people in 2024 sort of engage with the history of the Holocaust and the pain that other people suffered versus the pain that we suffer, and how that's very different. And like, I liked how everything kind of tied together. And it was also really funny.
Yeah, I also saw this one and I liked it a lot as well. I think it was vying for second place with a movie we haven't talked about yet. But yeah, I mean, it's really the showiness or the showy thing is Kieran Culkin's performance, and that's the dominant thing in this movie, and it's the thing that is going to get the most attention. But Jesse Eisenberg is also just very quietly, beyond writing and directing it, but his performance in it is
Yeah, he's
also
good.
carrying a lot of loads because, like, it needs Kieran needs someone to play off of, and also he's very much. I feel like he's very much the perspective character. I think the only, like, again, this is similar to sort of your like one thing maybe about Thelma is this my one thing maybe
Mm-hmm.
about A Real Pain was because I felt like the perspective as I was watching it was so close with Jesse Eisenberg's character. I very rarely felt charmed by Kieran Culkin's character. It always was like this
Oh,
guy
because
is like on the
it's
verge of like, he's gonna be embarrassing or whatever. And there, like, he had there's some swerves and kind of different it's all he's always at an 11, but where that 11 is kind of directed changes for Kieran Culkin. And it's definitely like discussed in the movie that like,
mm-hmm.
people always find him charming. And like that's sort of understandable, but I wasn't ever actually charmed because I always was like, this guy's a threat to like make,
Oh, I see.
certainly to make our prospective character uncomfortable, and also to maybe just get sort of spin out in some other direction.
Yeah.
That's not really a problem, but I do think that like if I'd had a chance to be like, yeah, I love this guy, like this guy's great, and then start to have it get like
Yeah.
get more revealed, to be like, oh, okay, maybe like I would have felt even more connected to what was going on. But also maybe that is too obvious. That feels like, of course, this guy that everyone loves and everyone gets along with, he has pain like every other human. So yeah, but that was the only sort of thing. I think I agree with everything that you say. It's very funny. It is also remarkably moving at times when it's looking to tap into emotions. I think it does a very good job of that. And it's not a large cast of supporting characters, but the supporting people who are around.
Yeah.
The most famous of whom is Jennifer Grey. Is they're all great, and they all do a really good job of being three-dimensional characters in small chunks.
I feel like her character, now that you mentioned her, was my way into his charm because she's the one who's the most charmed by him in their tour group. So so that's the other part of the film. It's not just a buddy, they're traveling through Poland, but they're specifically signed up to go on this tour with a bunch of other people they've never met, who all have sort of like family history or kind of cultural or emotional reasons why they want to go on this tour and kind of like confront the pain of what happened to sort of their ancestors, right? And I feel like shout out to the actor who plays the tour guide. I don't remember his name. I forgot to look it up, but he's really good. And I just like his character a lot because I mean maybe I'm biased because we're academics, and so like that would probably be us if we were in this movie. We'd be the ones being like, and just so you know, this monument was built in blah, blah, blah," right? And so I identified with his character a lot. But I think he was a really good way to kind of engage with the broader themes of the film because he's the one who's like trying to curate this experience for them. And it brings up a lot of interesting stuff in terms of like how do you organize a tour, like something, a leisurely activity in theory, a vacation activity that is about something so awful and so painful, right? So you're looking up his name now. I can see you.
Well, I am, and his name is Will Sharp. What I'm really trying to do is figure out who exactly he played in the second season of The White Lotus. And the problem is the character description is like he's connected to these three other characters, and I'm like, well, who are those characters? So I believe he was the Aubrey Plaza's husband. In the second season of The White Lotus.
Okay, which I haven't seen.
Which I don't know if that's. Oh yeah.
For a second, I thought you were saying he was her husband in real life. I'm like, good for him.
That would be great. Yes, no, but he is the one who's married to Aubrey Plaza, which is so interesting because that's such a different vibe than his character James, the tour guide in this movie, who is very bookish and nerdy, whereas that guy, obviously tech nerdy, but was in vacation mode. So anyway, that's where you may have recognized him from, and his name again is Will Sharp.
Right. Thank you. The only thing that actually bothered me about this when I watched it, and then later I was like, I shouldn't have made such a big deal out of that. I think it was just because it was the first movie I watched, and I was just not used to watching Sundance movies because I hadn't seen one since the year before. But the score in this is just very like, here's some classical piano, and that's like what most indie movies do. So I can't really like hold that against this movie, but I was just kind of like, oh come on, like this is not the time for like idyllic piano playing. Like let's find something else to play. I don't know why that bothers me so much. In retrospect, it shouldn't have bothered me, but maybe because it was the first movie I saw. I was like, I gotta think of something critical.
Right. But you had to downshift from big Hollywood,
right.
Or whatever, classic cinema.
Well, because like the thing Jesse Eisenberg talked about in the Q&A was that he really wanted to shoot all this stuff on location, but they had like no budget, right? Because it's an indie movie. And so he said they just had to get really creative with like, and he really praised their like production designer because apparently she would like go to places like a restaurant that had looked pretty modern and then just totally redressed it so it looked kind of like old world, like they were going to like a touristy place, and so it was just really amazing. The other fun thing about the Q&A is like there's really good banter between Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg. It seemed like they really bonded, and that comes through in the performances. I think that they kind of like got along really well because I think somebody in the audience asked Kieran Culkin what was it like being directed by a fellow actor, which to be honest, like people have to stop asking that question. Like Bradley Cooper, I've had to listen to Bradley Cooper answer that question over and over again. It's not a good question. Don't ask. But Kieran Culkin's answer was hilarious because he was like, yeah, it was really weird and kind of like, we'd be playing a scene together and he'd stop and then kind of step out of his role and be like, so I have some notes for you. And he'd be like, I have notes for you. Insert expletive. And he's just really funny about it. Where he's just like really it was clear that they had like a faux antagonistic relationship on set, like which I'm like, can we get footage of that and make that into like a side documentary? I really want to see that.
Yeah, the 20-minute blooper reel from this movie would be incredible.
Yes. All right, nice. I think we spent enough time talking about that movie. I think I know what your next one's going to be.
I think you do too, but I know we did spend enough time on it. I do just want to note this is one of the few movies that came to Sundance without distribution and then got acquired by Searchlight. So this was this being a real pain was one of the winners. There was it got $10 million in an auction.
I don't think I'd seen that story. I didn't see that number.
Yeah, for Searchlight.
That's good.
to get that.
Good for Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah, I mean,
not that he really needed $10 million.
Well, look,
never mind.
Yes, I mean, but they got to pay all those people all the credit cards.
I was just kidding.
Yeah, my okay, my one, which this is the one that was vying with a real pain for that second place slot, is Between the Temples, which is a movie directed by Nathan Silver. I'm saying that as if I know
You're
who
right. That's
Nathan
right.
Silver is. Well, no, but I was saying it as if it's like you all
Oh,
know
what do we know him
Nathan
from?
Silver. And he's worked on a bunch of other things that I also don't really know. Something called The Great Pretender. Anyway, this was a very fun movie. It starred Jason Schwartzman as a cantor at a Jewish temple who is there's a lot of dealing with loss and death. It was in it's still in mourning. Sort of, it's been about, I think it was said it was about a year after his wife had died in an accident, and he finds himself like not really capable of singing during temple services,
Yeah.
which is a problem
He's got
for a
the
cantor.
cantor equivalent of the yips.
He's got the yips. Yeah, yeah. He's like a Jewish Chuck Knobloch. That was a great baseball joke. If a great baseball joke from 1999. But anyway, so he also runs the bar and bat mitzvah not Sunday services. Classes, probably not necessarily on Sunday. And his former music teacher, Carol Kane, who is also coming off of the loss of a spouse, decides that uh, she never got a bat mitzvah because her parents, while Jewish, were not religious. So she wants to go through bat mitzvah school. So she starts doing that. It's cultural comedy, an interpersonal family relationships comedy, and it's not very deep. I don't, it's not super serious. It's not tackling like huge world issues, but I mean, you get to hang out with Jason Schwartzman and Carol Kane, and they're just really great. Their facial expressions and just some of their glances and just small movements are really incredible. Dolly De Leon from Triangle of Sadness is one of Jason Schwartzman's moms, along with Caroline Aaron, who has been in a ton of stuff. Was in the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. She's been in a million things. You'll see her, you'll like that. It's that woman. Got it. And Robert Smigel, famed TV writer from I'll Triumph the Insult Comic Dog from Conan, co-creator of the Dana Carvey Show, and a bunch of other things. TV
And more
Funhouse from Saturday
recently,
Night Live.
Leo, the Netflix movie with Adam Sandler as an iguana,
Oh,
right?
sure.
That's him. I feel like that's what Greg said wrote that movie.
I will defer once again. I will defer random animated movie knowledge to you and Greg. But I believe that, yes, Leo, he co-wrote 2 Hotel Transylvania films. You Don't Mess with the Zohan and Leo, with his Adam Sandler connection. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. It's very funny. I am not Jewish, so I am sure I didn't like get all the references, but I picked up on a bunch, and I thought they were very funny. I didn't quite like every choice that was made, which is why as time went on, I immediately was like, this movie came in second, and then as time went on, I was like, oh, those things I didn't like, maybe I don't know. But yeah, if and when this comes out, I'm sure it will. This is very much worth people's time. It's a funny movie, a funny and touching movie. Jen, you also saw this. What else
I did
what
also
did you
see
think?
this.
I know you had
I
a big complaint.
I had, yeah, I did, and it was, I wish I didn't, because I feel like if the thing I complained about was not true, then I would have had a very different opinion about that movie. But for me, the way that it was shot, and maybe that was exacerbated by like the internet lagging occasionally when I was watching the screening, and so it kind of made it even worse. But the way that this is shot is there's a lot of movement. It's kind of like a handheldy type thing, but there's like also just crazy amounts of close-ups and lots of cuts. And so I just found that really distracting visually, and I had a hard time just like engaging in what was going on because I kept being like, "Oh my gosh, like what is happening with the camera?" And I think the festival programmer who had introduced the film was like, "This film is perfect. I love it." And specifically said it has such a fresh aesthetic, or he used some phrasing where I was like, I didn't think of anything about it at first, but then after I watched the movie, I was like, oh, that's what that meant. Like, the camera didn't stop moving in a way that was very distracting. That's what they should have said. No, I'm just kidding. um uh but I think at the end of the day, that the performances and the writing of the two main characters, played by Jason Schwartzman, and Carol Kane, was so strong and so compelling, and their oddball dynamic, and how they kind of like interacted with each other, and how they both had their own sort of like family baggage and sort of emotional baggage, and they would go from being like really mopey to really manic together, right, in sync, kind of, you know what I mean? um I thought was really, really enjoyable, and I thought this had a lot to say about sort of people who feel like they're lost, and what they do and how they deal with that, and specifically how their families don't understand them. Like, I thought there's one scene that's sort of like a climactic, chaotic scene, family drama type scene, that I feel like was really, really good.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think Matt Neglia in his review was saying that alone is worth the price of admission, and I would agree with that. I think uh how everything kind of comes to a head, though I think I know what you're alluding to, and because we don't want to spoil it, I'll also be kind of cagey, but there is sort of a plot twist, or like a turn of events in the movie towards the end of the movie, that I also was like, oh, I wish they hadn't done that.
But also is so ultimately unimportant to like what
Yeah, that's
happens and
true.
the rest of it that it's like, why bother? Like, anyway, it's tough. Well, Jen and I will talk off mic about what we think,
About the
but
spoilers, yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so I feel like, I think the way you phrase it, of like there are a couple of choices that I sort of was like, but overall, I like what the movie was trying to do. I was really on board with.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I did sort of win because we were texting about it, and you said like the shaky camera's killing me, and I was like, it did. I didn't really notice it, like except that it felt like kind of a real kind of '90s low budget
Mm,
indie movie, which I guess is how I associate that when it's not a Jason Bourne action sequence kind
right.
of shaky cam thing. So yeah, that's one of those things where if I pick up on it, then like I think you were feeling, you're just like, I can't, like, can we stop? Can we just buy a tripod? Like, what's happening? But like it never hit me with this movie. But that's so yeah. I don't know, different takes, I guess. This one does not have a distributor yet. That it's still for sale. So if you are a major motion picture distribution studio or independently wealthy person
who
who's
is
listening to the
who is
long take
somehow
review,
listening to this
and
podcast?
they're just like, well, what already completed product? And I do remember the other thing I was going to say is how it just is interesting that both Thelma and this movie are sort of ostensibly about other things, and they tap into some different genres, but they are both about sort of what how do you handle loss, and one of them is a little bit more, I mean, middle age. Jason Schwartzman's middle age, and then Carol Kane is older. She's Carol Kane age, but doesn't quite feel like she's in like retire. Should this person be in a retirement home level of the characters in Thelma? So it's maybe like late middle age, early senior for
Yeah.
Carol Kane, and then so it was interesting to see the overlap, which maybe is just the Sundance of it all. Just as there are coming of age movies, there's now more and more coming of death age, and just sort of being like, well, how do you deal with that, and how do you just struggle with loss in the as the sort of mirror of how do you struggle with actually
Right.
becoming an adult and realizing all that's out there and what you want in the world.
That's a really good connection. I hadn't really thought about that, but it's also loss that precipitates newfound freedom in a really
Mm.
weird, bittersweet way, right? Which I think is in both of those films, Thelma and Between the Temples, pretty well handled. Like, I really liked that part of it, of like, well, I lived this way for this long, and now I don't have to. So can I start again? Kind of is the key question, I think, for those characters. Um, which is good. I think
Agreed. Yeah,
it's
it's
yeah.
interesting because I feel like It's the Vanity Fair sort of write up was done by Richard Lawson, the and the on the website, I assume in the print version as well, or maybe it's website only. And he was talking about how this was sort of a disappointing Sundance. It was
Mm.
a little bit of a letdown, and I think it's because some of those movies that had hype coming in, fell apart. But maybe it's the luck of the draw of the ones that we chose, and by we chose I mean Jen gave me a list of movies she thought were supposed to be good that were available, and I was like, okay,
All
and
right,
then I went and bought them.
that's why
um
we saw so many of the same ones. I'm now
yes, I
realizing.
just bought it off of I cribbed your list. I'm actually confused how you ended up seeing these two other movies, but we'll get to it. But but yeah, that it's this feels like the bad version of this movie, or the weaker version, that doesn't handle that sort of loss and the gain that comes from loss, but then the sorrow and the ache. Like in the last few years, when we have watched the sort of online only movies, it's been much more likely to get a movie that's like, oh, this is an interesting idea, it's just not very good, this
Right.
isn't done very well. And I don't think, at least I didn't get a lot of those. We'll get to the ones that maybe I thought were like that. But these were three strong movies that I'm very excited I saw, and would easily recommend to anyone when they eventually do come out.
I think Matt Neglia, to echo your Richard Lawson, was sort of like let down by the festival overall. I heard that in many places, and most recently, Matt Neglia on Next Best Picture was like, I didn't, and I think this is the answer, is he said, I didn't have a Past Lives from this year. And I think that's the problem, is that Past Lives was such like a skyrocketing hit coming out of the festival that now people have been spoiled, where they're like, oh, but I didn't have a mind-blowing of all-timer movie that I saw, so like therefore it's not as good this year. Which I don't think is true. I think
Fair.
it's just
Yeah, I also think that like we have discussed, like Greg has been worried about, check the transcript. I forget what old episode. I think it was the Air episode. There was an old episode of the Long Take Review that I was listening to, and Greg was like, "What's gonna happen if there's a strike? Are we gonna have any movies?" So he's been very on top of this. I think there were some people who, after you had Past Lives at Sundance, and after a very strong movie year overall in 2023, there's some concerns of the gap of when things won't come out, and there was some hope that, oh, maybe there'll be a handful of really excellent Sundance movies
that can
that
carry
we
us
are
through.
expecting that will fill those gaps. They're done, they're ready to sort of fill in, and it sounds like the critics are not thinking that that's what happened. So maybe it's also that there were some higher expectations, or higher hopes for what the Sundance festival could
Yeah.
provide the movie-going community.
Right. All right.
So your next movie, Jen, what do you
Okay.
got?
So my next pick is actually a documentary, and it's one of the ones that, because it's the two docs that you didn't see, so you haven't seen this one. But it's Skywalkers, which is not about Star Wars. Sorry, everybody. I know we have a lot of Star Wars fans who potentially listen to this podcast. Don't be misled by the title. Skywalkers, a love story, which actually I think like a day or two, it was like very fast. I think is the news story. It got bought by Netflix. And for those of you who aren't keeping up with like news behind Sundance, typically every year the big kind of like exciting mystery is going to be like, is there going to be a bidding war over certain films? Like, are the big studios going to throw down money to try to get these movies? I don't know how much Netflix paid for Skywalkers, but they usually shell out a lot of money, so, they're probably pretty happy about this overall. But Skywalkers refers to rooftoppers, who are people who often illegally climb super tall buildings. They sneak into buildings and then climb to the top without any sort of like harnesses or safety nets or anything like that. Like they just do it. And so this is sort of like, it's a sport, kind of like an underground sport, maybe is the best way to describe it. But this specific documentary follows two rooftoppers who meet and fall in love because they start out as rivals, because they're both kind of like on social media sort of competing with each other. They're like the two top rooftoppers on social media, have the most followers and stuff like that. And then they decide to kind of collaborate, and that leads them getting together in a relationship, and then like the movie sort of follows the ups and downs of that relationship, um and sort of like what happens post COVID, because then they can't really travel, and like and then they do like one last big climb, and it's like, will they, won't they, like, can they do it? And so it's it's really, it's one of those movies where you can't think too hard about the people in it, because they are like kind of very, how do I say this by being nice, um they're social media influencers, so they have this sort of vanity that stereotypically we associate with people who do that. um I mean, I didn't really, it's one of those things where, like, when I was watching the movie, I was so enthralled with what was going on, and, like, the fact that they're crazy enough to do this, that I didn't really stop to think about, "Oh, wait, like, they're trying to take pictures, like, really superposed pictures of them dressed up nicely at the top of a crazy tall building just to get social media follows and sponsors and stuff like that." So an alternate version of this movie that really leans into the social like the social commentary and the social critique of social media and its role in our society and stuff like that, and capitalism, like, would be really interesting, and I would want to see that. This version of the movie is kind of like, there's a reason the after the colon it says a love story. It's because it's very much like, you know very sort of obvious and heavy-handed, like, climbing to the top of a building with no safety net is a metaphor for trusting someone else in a relationship, and like learning how to trust is, and that's like very much like the text of the movie. But I'm gonna be honest, it totally worked on me. It really did. Like, because it's also a heist movie, because it also kind of shows them trying to plan how to sneak into the building and get past security, and like, they like disguise themselves as construction workers, and it's just like really fun from a, like, can they do it sort of perspective. I would not recommend seeing this movie if you are afraid of heights. Um, like, especially, I guess, don't see it in a theater if you're afraid of heights, because I can imagine on a big screen it would be terrifying. Because part of the cool thing about the movie is that they use all these like drones and stuff to actually get shots of them way up, way up. Like, this is like, um, what's the really tall building in Mission Impossible?
Oh, the Burj Khalifa.
Yes, it's like that. But they don't
Yeah,
have
yeah.
any like ropes or anything.
Right. There's no like CGI'd out safety equipment.
Right. And they don't have
That
Tom Cruise. Like, they,
right.
you know.
Right. It isn't a fictional story where you're like, well, I know what happens is that like he's going to be fine because this is a movie. I don't know who these people are. Theoretically, they could fall. I am afraid of heights, but I don't get like generally don't get weirded out if I'm watching a movie, even on like a big, like I watched
Okay.
the
So
Burj Khalifa
unless it's a
scene
real height.
for me,
Yeah.
because my fear of heights is I'm worried I'm going to fall, and I know I'm watching a movie, so it's like, well, I'm not going to fall. They may fall, but oh well, like they're idiots. No, I don't know. That's mean. But yeah, no, that's interesting. I will admit to being immediately disappointed when I was looking at the listing of things. I did assume this was some sort of
Skywalker's is a Star Wars
documentary
tie-in.
about Star Wars fandom or whatever, and then I was like, it's not. And I was like, oh, okay. But it sounds really fun. It sounds like, and it makes sense. These are the movies linked on the Wikipedia page, which is barely more than a stub right now. But that it's a little bit of Free Solo and a little bit of Man on Wire, of which if you're a documentary looking to win best documentary feature at the Academy Awards, not a bad combination to have of two previous winners, but that like heist movie, let's break in somewhere and try to make this happen,
right,
with the love story of people risking themselves at crazy climbs. Yeah, it sounds like it can be really effective. I honestly, I wonder, and I would be curious if this came up at all in the the Q&A or introduction. My immediate thought is, yes, I'd also like the what are we doing when influencers are going to climb buildings to get like it's annoying enough when they're trying to get a perfect picture on a beach, but like now they're doing it on like
right.
the top of World Trade One or whatever. But like, I guess, like, was that going to be so obvious? I wonder if the filmmakers thought about doing that and then decided that's actually obvious. What if we just
I
told this as a
I
adventure
don't think
story?
that was ever on the table,
Okay.
because in the Q&A, the director, who I believe is Jeff Zimbalist, I think is his name, said that he was like when he was younger, he was an amateur rooftopper.
I see.
And so like he's all in, you know what I mean?
So
He's
he's in
like,
it.
this is a craft, this is an art. And they do in the movie try to make this loose argument for the photos they're taking being a like modern art. So that's kind of interesting from a
Okay.
like exit the gift shop sort of perspective of like, is this art? But they also are turning their photos into NFTs, and so like then we're like, oh, we're back to their crypto bros. So I don't know. Yeah, it's
Oh
you
boy.
just can't think about that too much. Just enjoy the ride. They're very much like a crowd pleasing documentary. In some ways, a bad match for Netflix because it really should be like on an IMAX screen. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which I don't know if it will because of Netflix. But at the same time, it is really a good pairing for Netflix because it's so crowd pleasing. It's like, you know, it's easy. It's a really easy watch.
It's going to be in the top 10 for like 2
Yeah.
months.
Right.
The good news, because Netflix owns the Egyptian now, Jen, you if you were able to come up to LA, I'm sure it will play at the Egyptian Theater, which is not an IMAX screen, but it's a very big screen.
Right.
90-foot, I think, screen. So
yeah, I'm sure it'll look amazing because just the shots they get from on top of the buildings are gorgeous. Like it's just from a purely technical filmmaking perspective, it's really cool.
Yeah.
You can look up one of the two main characters. Her name's Angela Nicolau, I think. She has her social media. If you look her up on Instagram, you can see all her pictures. She's trying to make, you know, modern art and sell NFTs. And it's the whole
Hey,
thing.
who amongst us?
But yeah, and it's cool it is very much like Free Solo of like a dissection and character study of like who would be crazy enough to do this kind of thing. Like, so it does do that to check that box of like, what does someone have to be like to want to do this all the time?
That's interesting.
And to be constantly chasing like the next tallest building that they can climb.
I like that. I feel like that's a good transition to the last movie that you and I both watched, which is it's in fourth
also
place.
very much about social media.
Yes, which also has a strong sort of social media and influencer core commentary component at the center of it, which is going to sound strange when I begin describing what this movie is like. And the movie is called Love Me, and it's that old tale, that tired old tale of a smart buoy. In a water that falls in love with a satellite that is the last remnant of human civilization flying above Earth, and how that love story plays out. Which, you know, the movie is as odd as that sounds. Like, I mean, it's like I feel like the capsule review is like, this shouldn't. It's such an interesting idea. There's so many ways that it can go wrong. I don't know if it always goes right, but it never goes so wrong that I was like, this is a disaster and it's falling apart.
Right. It had you on the hook still the whole time.
Yeah, I was always like, yeah, like, again, you know, I don't mean to, I think about this for a lot of movies and stories. This is not, I don't mean to pick on Sundance for it, but when you're watching sort of barely or unvetted movies, like you haven't heard anyone talk about it because maybe no one's seen it. It's just really easy to think like, is this all going to fall apart even if I'm liking this now? And I think it never fell apart. You know, it teetered, but it never fully fell apart. But yeah, it's about these two non-human entities that begin, establish a connection, and then begin. I'm trying to think of a good way of describing this. I don't think it necessarily is giving anything away, but because the satellite is in space after it was sent into space as the Earth was sort of collapsing and humanity's civilization was falling apart, a bunch of information was put into it, and it was a sort of like, this for anyone who finds this is
it's
sort
like
of
the
the
time capsule.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the time capsule of humanity. And so,
but it's basically the internet.
Yes, it's, or at least it's set up as, what do you want to search for with that sort of, with the similar sort of results page. And when the smart buoy that can activate that, like, starts going through the search engine and like just sucks in a whole bunch of data, it is like, well, like, to become more of an individual, it becomes an influencer played by Kristen Stewart, or taps into this influencer and is like, that's the like person I'm going to try to communicate as and present myself with, and then tries to make the satellite's consciousness turn into that influencer's boyfriend, played by Steven Yeun. And it's, you know, you're seeing clips of these influencers, you're seeing sort of how these robots are interacting. They begin to create a, you know, a sort of a CGI environment in which, you know, they can interact with each other, a sort of like metaverse between the two of them, which grows, you know, which evolves and changes over time. And yeah, it's this wild kind of sci-fi story. It is a love story. The biggest critique I was seeing from people, you know, in the letterbox and stuff, was they were like, well, I don't know why a computer would choose an influencer. Like the premise is inherently dumb. When it was like, but that seems to be the whole, like, one of the points of the movie is that, like, when humanity is gone, what's left behind are the records of what people were doing, and this is what people are doing. It seemed like that was an intentional critique, but I think a lot of people really bumped in a similar way that you're talking about Skywalkers, that folks might not be able to enjoy this because it's not a critique of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's people who really like bristled at this movie because of the influencer dynamic and you know, the aesthetic that was being used a lot. But you know, the two actors in the different ways in which they were performing were doing an incredible job voice acting, and the scenes of them, you know, human acting. The tech is not mind blowing or anything, but always worked. Always was sort of like, yes, this is telling the story. And yeah, it was a really unique approach to, you know, to telling a story. This is a, you know, not a story you see all the time. So I'm really glad to have checked it out. Didn't like, you know, again, I don't think it came together and was as impactful as the other movies that we've already talked about. But yeah, I think that if this is one to pay attention to.
I feel like the big critique that I heard from a lot of people, which actually this is the one thing that didn't bother me as much. I'll get into what did bother me in a minute, don't worry. But the is that the so part of the sort of like high conceptness of this is that the actual like cinematic medium evolves over the course of the movie. I don't want to spoil it, but like it goes through different phases of like there's some very crude CGI, and then but it's supposed to be like as the characters evolve and kind of learn, it's like machine learning, the visuals of the film get more advanced and like and realistic looking, right? So a lot of people had a problem with that because they were like, I didn't really want to watch an hour of like Steven Yeun and Kristen Stewart as Mies, the Wii, like from the Wii. Like that's I can't remember who made that comparison, but I was like, oh yeah, that is sort of what that looked like for a while. So a lot of people bumped up against that. I understood that as part of like the medium was part of the message, and so I was fine with that actually. For me, it was more how it was engaging with the like how much of a critique it was. So because on the one hand, as you're talking, I'm like, well, it's not like there's no critique because the critique is sort of built into their relationship, right? How the dysfunctional nature of the relationship you can sort of trace back to it being founded on sort of the phoniness of social media, right? But then I was like, but is that all this movie has to say?
Right.
So my thing was like, how sophisticated is the concept, or is it high concept in premise but not actually in theme? And then I'm like, oh, then it's not doing quite what I wanted to do. So, but I couldn't tell; it was too ambiguous. I was like, is this the most sophisticated movie I've ever seen, or is this basically like a first year writing student's essay on social media where like they state the obvious? You know what I mean? Like that was my letterbox. If you looked at my letterbox review, that's essentially what it says. It's like I don't know. I don't know which this is, and I would like to know. like
I
uh,
did feel like, and I hate to say this, I did feel like listening to the Q&A of the team. I think they have the same last name. I assume they're married or they're siblings. Who wrote and directed this. They kind of felt like they only had kind of superficial takes. They were like, we just wondered what would it be like if, and it was this kind of very
mm,
very sort of surface level, which I agree. That's part of why I'm like, oh, I like, I, you know, I don't know what it is I want from that. Like, I don't know if I would have wanted like this to become some sort of scathing critique of, and this is all humanity became. Like, I don't know if I needed that, but I did feel like I needed a little bit more about
Mhm.
like, you know, if nothing else, then why do these machines want to strive to be human, or why do these machines, you know, begin to want to have a connection, and you know, what does that mean? Like, I think that seemed
Right.
more interesting to me than necessarily any deeper on the influencer thing, social media thing, only because I'm even if someone was very, very smart about that, I don't know how far they could go.
Right.
And it was like, well, they don't have anything else to say about it, really. And so, yeah, I do think that like there's a cap on this movie in terms of, you know, again, maybe there's some people out there who were just like, I was wowed, I was moved, and I do feel like it was saying some really important fundamental things about existing and consciousness and sentience and all of that. But yeah, for me it was like, yeah, this was really great, and I'm glad I watched it. I shouldn't say really great, this was very good, and I'm glad I watched it. It didn't get to great or excellent because
Yeah.
it didn't seem to really have that curiosity. It was more of, what if we had this wild premise and then, you know, use sort of some of these things that would be weird if suddenly these people really cared about X, Y, and Z of America, you know, pop culture ephemera from the last 20 or 30 years of America. You know, wouldn't it be funny if like that came in and there's not really much thought beyond that, and then let these two actors who are, you know, wonderful screen presences and just, you know, wonderful performers, let them kind of carry the day, and they
Yeah.
do. But, you know, yeah, there's definitely only so much there.
Yeah. They are achieving a pretty high degree of difficulty because they have to both adopt this sort of influencer social media persona, but then switch to being like AI, right? Like, how would a humanoid AI respond to the situation? Because they sort of break the, not break the fourth wall, but they sort of break the illusion and talk to each other, right? And then they go back and like, and maybe that's spoiling too much, but like, um, I feel like there's a lot of sort of switching, like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different registers as actors that they have to be in this film that maybe you don't notice the first time you watch it. Probably, I feel like if I went back, I would probably appreciate it even more. Um, for in terms of the themes, the thing that I saw had potential. So again, like if this is a student paper, the thing I'm circling, being like, you need to go back and develop this idea more. Was I was like, oh, are they trying to parallel sort of the facade that people put on social media? How different is that really from when we engage in a relationship with another person in general, like regardless of the circumstances? And like, is there
Mm.
inherent in creating, like forming a relationship with another human, is there an inherent sort of shield or veneer that we put on that keeps them out from the real you? Because I feel like, and this is in the like description of the movie, so it's not a spoiler, but the buoy's name is Me, and the the satellite's name is I Am. And so like, it's there. It's there that they're like, who are we as people? Like me, like that's why I was like, oh, how much of this is about selfhood, like as a theoretical concept? And I don't think it really is. So, um,
Yeah, and the movie's called Love Me, you know, so it
right.
feels like it should be about identity and about love, and like kind of, but you know, what if you just want to watch a movie that's got like, Nintendo Mii's in it, and a smart buoy and a satellite, and these two actors, like, you don't think that hard about it,
Yeah.
and just, you know, that's fine. You'll probably do okay. But yeah, I think, you know, as sci-fi fans, we kind of want there to be more, and there isn't really more. I'm gonna, as a brief tangent, I just want to give a shout out to, there's a thing that exists online, called, fan, 17776 football. And it is, written by, or you know, executed, designed by John Boyce, Bois, who is I mean, sort of a sports reporter. He's done a lot of long form documentaries about sports teams that are very sort of multimodal and using a lot of ways of sort of going through the stories and narratives when we talk about constructing narratives here. Those are good. I saw multiple movie critics put his Minnesota Vikings documentary from last year on their best of, even though it's just like a YouTube video he put out. And so this was on the Sports Nation website, and it's this sort of interactive fiction that is I'm somewhat giving it away that it's revealed in part one. It's satellites communicating to each other, and like one of them is just like designed to run fantasy football things, being like, do you know about Frank Gifford in the 1967 season? And it's like these things in the distant future trying to communicate with each other, and like things are happening on calendars, and there's YouTube videos in the middle that you have to watch, and instruction manuals. It's this great, like, weird uh thing that I kept thinking about with this movie. It's like
Okay.
but I don't know if it's more successful, and maybe you have to know a little bit about sports to enjoy it as much. But very good. It's just out there, and it's recommended.
Nice. So Love Me does not actually have a distribution yet, and I was having a hard time guessing where this would end up. You know what I mean? Like which streaming service does this end up? Is this feels kind of like an Amazon Prime potentially?
Oh
Maybe?
no,
I don't know.
maybe. I mean, yeah, I feel bad saying this, but I feel like, yeah, if it were like 10% smarter, I could see Apple going for it, because
Mm.
they do like,
Oh,
they've
that's
got
true. They do a lot of
Foundation and
futuristic stuff.
Silo,
Yeah.
but like I don't know if this fully, again,
Yeah.
like, is this something that they think is gonna land? They also don't do that many movies, so I could see it being a Netflix dump. I could see it, um, yeah. I mean, it's so strange. Like, it's just because it's sort of a romance, but it's this weird sci-fi like concept that you need to you got to be interested by the concept for the beginning of the movie to get any hook in you, because it's a long time before you get to beginning to grasp
Mm-hmm.
the famous people who are in it. So I feel like in an algorithm, like, watch 5 minutes and stop age, like, it's not as going to be widely popular. And I think even the streamers that get a lot of content know that. So yeah, I don't know. You know where I'm going to guess? I'm going to guess it goes to Showtime and Paramount Plus. I'm putting it in an After Yang category, of
That's
like,
actually. I was gonna be like,
so
where did After Yang go? Because that seems like the closest comp.
it was a
Even though,
Showtime, which is now, just
mm,
under the Paramount Plus umbrella. So I'm going to guess that's where it goes.
okay, yeah, we each have one more movie, I think, right?
We do.
And then okay, so my last one is called Nocturnes. This is another documentary, and it is about moths, just moths. That's it. And so the reason that I put this on my list, it was a last minute addition because I was listening to IndieWire usually does a live podcast at
Mhm.
Sundance. And so I think this year they were interviewing, I can't remember who, like, how many people were on the panel, but it was a series of people who were like either associated with the festival or were like covering the festival. And one of the guests was really raving about this movie about Nocturnes and how it was like, this amazing and they were predicting that it was going to be like a big sale and end up being like a big deal after the festival, and that they were just going on and on how like it was a very like sensory experience and had a very strong environment, like a haunting sort of environmental message. And so I was like, oh, okay, like I don't, I like nature documentaries as much as the next person, so like I'll give it a go. And I don't know, I just was like not in the right frame of mind, I think, to appreciate this movie. It was very quiet and very slow, um, and there were, and so like for me, when they were filming the actual moths, I was in, but then there would be like 2 minutes of moths and then 20 minutes of all this field work, like the scientists in the field setting up the tent for the moths. and like driving through the it takes place in the Himalayas, driving through the jungle and stuff like that. And I was just like, I don't know if I could do this right now. So I did watch the whole thing, and I did a couple times like fast forward to get to the moths. Um which I feel bad about. But I was like, otherwise I'm going to quit this movie. So I was
You were
just
just
keep going.
Werner Herzog as the client. I want to see the moths.
Yes,
Like,
I would like to see the moths.
I would like to see the
Um,
moths. Yeah,
and
there
like
you go.
yeah, it looked really cool. And I think I sort of wish I had seen it in a quiet place with headphones, because I was watching it with like my kids were watching their iPads, and like there's like my people were in the kitchen, people were coming and going, you know what I mean? Like, so there was a lot of ambient noise that was competing with the movie on my TV. And I feel like in a quieter environment, I really would have appreciated, because it did sound really good. It was like the sound, it was very much like I think I was listening to NPR pop culture happy hour, and they described it as like an ASMR experience, where it was like lots of like chirping and rain and like like thunderstorms, like lots of like ambient noise that is very pleasant. And so like um so I think I didn't benefit from it in the way that I would have had I had other viewing conditions, probably. But that said, it was like the moths were really cool, because what they would do basically is like they would, and hence the title Nocturnes, I think. But like, every night they'd be in like pitch black in the middle of the Himalayan or forest, and they would set up this like screen and have like blast like a light at the top, and then of course that attracts like a million moths, and then they have basically a camera, and they're going up super close and taking all these cool photos, and then like filming them and stuff. And so the colors and the amount of detail, and just like I'm like, oh yeah, moths are furry, like like that's how close we got to these moths. So like all that was very cool. And it does have a pretty environment, like in terms of cinema that supports sustainability and stuff, and like in the environment and stuff like that. It did seem very powerful. So there is kind of like an emotional core to it. But you just have to be in the mindset to have this be like a meditative experience. And I was just not quite there. So that's why it's at the bottom
Yeah,
of my list.
this sounds like a movie. A movie that I deeply respect, but will never see. But B, if I were to see it, this would be a thing to see in the theater, and I'm not
Yeah.
surprised the person raving about it likely saw it in a theater, because then like you're not going to be distracted, except maybe by other theater goers, but hopefully at a film festival that wouldn't happen. You have the sound system is like attuned, so you get all that stuff, and then that sort of slow buildup of the sort of like prep work and everything, because you can't like look at your phone, you can't tab over to something else, like you're just really could be locked into it. And I get that there are movies that are, you just need the immersive experience to get everything out of it, and that is what this sounds like. I guess as a follow-up short film, you should Google Norm Macdonald's moth joke on Conan. It's really good. There's like my guess, because it's old enough, there's probably like light homophobia in there, but still a good telling of an old joke. I'm only somewhat serious
Nice.
about
Nice.
that. But yeah, I mean that sounds good. I will note it did win one of the jury prizes, the World Cinema Documentary Special Jury Award for Craft, which
Which makes sense. Yeah.
where you're getting a lot of, there's special jury award for sound and music and acting and cinematic innovation, and crafts is another one. So yeah, this does make a lot of sense, like how they filmed it, and I guess how they set it all up. So yeah, I mean it sounds like one of those movies where, again, not to jump too far ahead, that gets like a very sort of quiet release, maybe relevant to its subject matter, and then somehow gets nominated for the Oscars, and people are like, what's this movie about moths instead of this movie, this documentary about Will Ferrell, or this documentary about this basketball player? Like, there's a documentary people know, and they're like, why wasn't it nominated instead of this? But yeah, I mean, it sounds pleasant, if nothing else.
Moths are cool.
Moths are cool. I agree. Um,
And some of them are very large. Like I'm a
some
little
moths.
disturbed. Like, I
Some
didn't
moths are
realize
small. Some moths are large.
that.
But
This
no,
was
that's
my
good.
level of engagement with this movie, I guess. But
Moth
yeah,
go flap flap.
I should give it another chance. I should watch it under different conditions, just to make up for me being like, okay, where are the moths? Like, where I don't care about the people. Where are the moths?
I
Uh,
I gotta say, it feels bad, very bad interjecting into your review to do a Mandalorian quote and then not getting it right. So I feel terrible about not getting the client meme correct. Okay, the final movie I saw, and I'm realizing the downside of going in this order. We started with what we were most excited about. Is this is the only movie I sort of actively didn't care for, and so it's sort of a sour note, I guess, to leave on after the lovely moths, which sound not bad, just not exactly what you want. And this was a movie called Handling the Undead, which is a Norwegian. I'm looking at it here being labeled as a horror mystery movie. Horror's pushing it. I mean, I guess there are elements that are horrific. I should say there are elements that are horrific. It's a story of, I think it's three different families who have to deal with the return of their recently deceased loved ones to life through a unknown reason where the dead come back to life. The recent dead, not I guess not all dead, it seemed like, but the recent dead come back to life. And so, like, how do people emotionally react to this strange new return of this person they were in the process of mourning? So, continuing the 2024 Sundance. My 2024 Sundance trajectory of mourning and death and loss, and trying to move forward and make connections. It's what happens, and each person's sort of in a different stage of that, where they're just like either it's really raw, or they're struggling, or they're sort of like seem to have kind of come to terms with it, and then it's like, oh, this person's back, and that's interesting as an idea. And it's also playing around with like sort of expectations of zombie movies, because like I believe that there's certainly one or two times the word zombie is used. This is not a movie that pretends like no one knows what zombies are, but it is sort of like, oh, but like they're zombies, like what's gonna happen? And it feels like an attempt was made to sort of say, okay, well, we know what everyone expects in a zombie movie, and let's not do that. Let's talk about like the emotional truth of seeing people come back to life. But it was just kind of boring, and like it didn't really like eschew zombie tropes so much as it like really delayed a lot of things, and was just like, so it's sort of like, oh, I guess in this world a zombie wouldn't do this thing. Okay, no, it does do that. Like, oh, a zombie isn't really like this, it's more like, it's like, no, it is like that. It is like what I think a zombie would be. Okay. And so it ultimately, it just didn't connect with me. I saw reviews of people that really loved it because they're like, I don't care for zombie movies, I don't want a movie that's some sort of survival, like respond to treating zombies as monsters, but treating like the return of the people in our lives and what that means. They thought it was very emotional, and they found it very moving. I didn't feel that connection really with these characters. I thought like just there were long kind of slow stretches that I think were trying to, not quite moth level, but like we're trying to get you into like, and this is the sort of routine of their lives and how they're trying to deal with stuff. But like, yeah, for reasons that I can't dig into too much
Hmm.
because it would get into spoilers. It's just like, it all didn't really feel worth it to me in the end. Like that time put into it didn't like give me what I feel like it wanted me to get out of it. And again, other people did, so maybe some other folks would agree. I will say it, and I'm gonna, Jen, I'm gonna turn to you for some help with some pronunciations of these Scandinavian names. But the star of The Worst Woman in the World, Renate Rainsby, is that? Do you have a?
I think it's Renata Reinsva or something. I wish I'd prepped
Well,
for this. I did
so
when the worst person in the world was the hot ticket. I did know how
you
to
had it
pronounce
down.
her name, and now it's I've only seen it written for so long
Well,
that
I
I've
will
forgotten how
say,
to pronounce it.
I will say, and I'm not blaming you, Jen, because you were not the only one, but there were multiple people that were like, and it's a reunion for the worst person in the world between Renata and someone else, and I spent until tonight. I was just like, I guess that's the director of The Worst Person in the World who also directed this movie, but then it's not. It's one of the other actors, and it's so I was thinking having not seen The Worst Person in the World, a blind spot, I need to deal with that. I was like, well, everyone loved that movie, so this movie will probably be really good. And I was like, what happened? Like, why? Like, everyone seemed to think that had this like real emotional connection, and this one didn't. And it's because it's directed by some other person who doesn't have a Wikipedia page, and I don't really know anything about them. But I do know that the screenplay was co-written by John, and I apologize, John, John Ajvidi Lindquist, who was the author of the book it was based on, and he wrote the book Let the Right One In, which is an amazing like take on an old genre in the Scandinavian frozen world. Is a vampire story for those who don't know. Was it Let Me In? Is that the Americanized version, which
I have
is
not seen that
also
version. I've
that
only
version's
seen the
also supposed to be
original.
pretty good, but
Oh, okay.
the Let the Right One In is incredible. So yeah, I guess either way, I would have been disappointed. Whether it was because of the movie that these people, the filmmakers weren't a part of, but or if I knew about the movie that the author had been a part of. Anyway, yeah, it's again, if you are someone that really is like, I like elevated horror, I want horror that's elevated to the point that it is boring, then this might be a good movie for you. But it really didn't connect with me. I will also say, and this is one of those things where I feel like we have a commitment to it here, even though it's a little later in the movie and it's a spoiler. There is depiction of violence to animals that happens in the movie that was very unsettling, and is notable. And I won't say anything further. But yeah, that was just, I don't think that wasn't like enough. In a weird way, that was sort of like, oh, this is, I feel something now. But I would warn people about that, and I would hope there are not many people listening to our show who are like, I wasn't into that movie until I heard about the animal cruelty. Now I'm on board. But there's that's there. Be aware of it. And again, I also don't recommend it to begin with. So
Nice.
the end.
So Mike, and Oscar had a really funny bit about this where I think they said this is a zombie movie for people who have never seen zombie movies before.
I think that those are the only people
Who
who
would
would
be into
be
it.
not even into it, but would be like would feel something from it. Like,
Okay.
I feel like if you've seen a parody of a zombie movie, like if you've seen like a Simpsons episode that has zombies, there would be things where you're like, well, I assume that these things would happen. And then this movie tries to act like that's not going to happen, but then doesn't shy away, like doesn't actually give
Mm,
you a different path. It just is sort of
right.
like, it's just taking it, it's slow. It's taking its time.
Okay.
So yes,
Well, that's
that's a
disappointing.
great bit, a very short, very much more condensed than what I said, but it's true.
So they had a lot of funny stuff on their Sundance episode. I think they
I'll have to
played a
check.
game where the also Mike, who had seen all the Sundance movies, quizzed Mike 1 about like which one of these is a fake Sundance movie premise. It was really good. You should listen to it. It was really
That's really
good.
nice. I like that.
Because all of them sound nuts when you read the log
Right.
lines for all the movies. And Love Me was one of them. So that's good.
Yes, I can imagine.
So I have to confess, this is a safe space, right? I have to confess, I did have a ticket to this movie. I was very excited about it because I was like, yeah, I love Worst Person in the World. And I looked it up. I believe I was correct when you asked me to pronounce it. Renata Reinsve, I think is how you say her name.
Okay.
She's amazing. And I was like, gotta see it. And like, Worst Person in the World reunion, let's go. And I'm like, and it's like kind of a zombie movie. Like this is a creepy premise. Great, I'm in. And then what happened was I just happened to not. I think it's because in the Sundance website when you log into the movies you have, I think they might be alphabetized. There was some, it was like the fourth movie down on my list, and so I was like not in a hurry to watch it. Like I think I started with A Real Pain and was just working my way down the list.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got to Handling the Undead, all of the bad reviews had come out. And so I was like, maybe I'll wait till later on that one. And then you saw it and you were like, it's not good. And I was like, okay, like that's really disappointing. And and I had the intention of watching it, but I just kept putting it off and putting it off because I knew that I probably wouldn't be into it. And when, of course, it's the last night that the screenings are about to expire. I think it's like 10:55 Mountain Time is one of the last chance you have to watch them on like Sunday night. And I'm like, okay, I can watch Skywalkers, a movie I've heard good things about, or this like weird zombie movie that PT says is not good. And so I watched Skywalkers first, was like very into it, and then I was like, well, it's late, like I should be getting ready for bed, but let me just watch like the first few minutes of handling the undead. And I'm just like, nothing happened. And I'm like, what is this? Like what? And I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do it.
In the movie's defense, the undead had not arrived to be handled yet. Like,
Right.
it takes a little bit for the undead to show up. But yeah. Yeah, that opening is like, it's like an old guy walking through an apartment building or apartment like complex. I can see that not being like, I don't
And
know.
I was like, there's no conflict yet. And there are no zombies. So I guess I can't watch this right now. I guess I'm not going to watch like a little bit and get the gist of it. So then I was out.
Yeah,
so.
I will say, thinking about like there were like, because there is this sort of slow, you're like, what's happening? Like, what's going on? It seems so desolate. But then you start to get these pieces of, like, the way they gave information of how, like, who people had lost and why we were following them and what exactly was going on, was, the craft of it all was not like poor, and the actors were all doing as good a job as they can. And again, I saw, like, I clicked through, I was like, who's giving 4.5 or 5 stars on Letterboxd to Handling the Undead? And there were people, and they were just like, I don't like zombie movies, I don't like the way these stories are usually told. This really spoke to me. The space in between things, the long pauses, like all the things that I didn't like, they really liked. So,
Okay.
Maybe there are people out there who would feel they would get really into it. But yeah, I think your reaction was not a bad one, of like, nothing's really happening yet. Like, now imagine that a zombie show up and nothing continues to happen. Like, now take away the zombies.
Yeah, you're describing it very well. I can picture it. I can picture it. And I'm glad I didn't stay up all night watching this movie. I think it would just made me mad, probably. All right. So those are all the movies that we saw. If you're listening and you also tuned in to some of the online screenings, or you were, fortunate enough to go there in person, we want to live vicariously through you. Let us know what movies you watched. And if there are ones that we missed, that you feel like we should be on our radars. We'd love to hear that. But yeah, we are going to move into Oscars watch. I feel like we don't have that much to say because we've been kind of talking about it the whole time.
And this also feels like when I push back a deadline for an essay in class, and it's like they haven't turned in writing project 2, but the clock on the wall says we got to start talking about writing project 3, but we're looking at the 2025 Oscars,
right,
when we're still waiting to see what happens with the 2024 ones. So yeah, we feel a little out of time even beginning to discuss it.
Right. But nonetheless, because this is what we do, we will do what probably will be pretty brief Oscars watch. Okay, so I mean, typically there are a few movies that come out of Sundance, as we talked about at the top of the show, that become Oscar players, right? They become Oscar contenders. Do you
it's
feel
interesting.
Like... Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I will say, like, that has only kind of been a recent trend. For a long time, like in the 80s and even through most of the 90s, it was not that common. Like, and the first couple of movies that got strong Oscar consideration out of Sundance were like movies by famous people. It was a Woody Allen movie, and then Moonstruck, and Norman Jewis. So they had both already won Best Picture. So like they had movies that they brought to Sundance, but like Sundance needed them more than the movies needed Sundance at that point. So it started to sort of become more of a thing, in the 2000s. It was sort of like every other year a movie would get in for like Best Picture. And I'll admit, I'm just sort of looking at Best Picture listings. But I say for like the last decade, it's not every year, but like close to it. There's a Best Picture nominee that comes out of the festival, whether it's premiering there, US premiering, or in the actual competition, with the sort of peak of it being our aforementioned COVID year Academy Awards, which had two Sundance festivals to pull from. So they had
Right.
the father Minari and Promising Young Woman from the 2020 festival, and then Judas and the Black Messiah from the 2021 festival. And Coda is the only one that's won so far. Coda got the
Right.
nomination and got Best Picture. Last year, no Best Picture, but we had the Bill Nighy's Living performance was
Oh, that's right.
the sort of Sundance legacy in fictional movies.
Yeah, and I you're right. Now that you're describing that timeline, it really is Coda winning Best Picture that sort of created more buzz for Sundance as a platform for awards contenders.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like, yeah, with Past Lives premiering, the big question was like, oh, it's a Sundance premiere. Can it make it? That's always the thing, because Sundance is the first, you know, critics always complain about this. Like, why are Oscar nominations coming out while we're at Sundance? Like,
Right.
please, can we just like give us a minute? And like, so it is
What
really
tough lives
interesting.
they got to be in Park City and pay attention to the Oscar
I know,
nominations.
right? But yeah, I mean, like, so it's very early in the award season. It's the earliest time a film could premiere and be eligible for the Oscars the following year. And so the big narrative question has sort of become like, if a film does premiere, does it have the legs to kind of like make it all the way like through the whole year until until next year's Oscars? Which of these films do you feel like could be fit that bill?
I mean, on the narrative side, I mean, again, just thinking about how, Past Lives and Coda and Minari to some degree, those were the movies where like Sundance was over, and that's what I heard about people saying, like, we saw this movie, it was incredible, oh my god, that that Didi is the one that's in that slot.
Yeah.
And there's like you said, I saw the TV Glow. And there is room for A24 weirdness maybe in the Oscar conversation, certainly maybe in like a screenplay area, but I would say right now, Didi is the one that sort of stands out for maybe like a Best Picture consideration. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like there might be performances that could be Oscar contenders. I mean, I know you're really rooting for June Squibb, but I feel like Kieran Culkin is the obvious choice in
Yes,
terms of likelihood.
and I'm
Just
down. I'm down with that.
right, right. Yeah,
I'm
no
not
one
leading the campaign.
who says no.
No, no.
So I feel like to me that's the one that sticks out as like, because it is a very big performance. There are lots of clips that you could use as your Oscar reel for his performance. Potentially, it does feel like that could be the one that makes it over. Whether the movie does, I mean, I know I've seen A Real Pain show up on a couple people's lists of like what could be at the Oscars next year from Sundance. And like consistently, every article has the still from A Real Pain as their like headline
Mm-hmm.
image. So I'm like, oh, I guess people are really, really into this movie, which makes sense. I also really liked it. So that's the first one I think of, and then maybe a Jason Schwartzman or a Carol Kane, particularly Carol Kane. If people are like, oh wait, Carol Kane, we love Carol Kane. Why doesn't she have an
Sure.
Oscar? Right? Like I can see that kind of percolating, and kind of gaining momentum. But I do feel like it is probably much more likely that a couple of the docs that probably not even the ones we've seen. like I do think Skywalker's does have a shot. Does feel like it could take the crowd pleaser spot. Usually there's always one slot in the doc nominees. Like I'm thinking of last year's winner, Navalny was a Sundance premiere or like a Sundance movie, and that one is like a really well paced narratively structured thriller kind of documentary. So I can sort of see Skywalker's like occupying that similar role in the lineup. But I feel like there were probably a bunch of other documentaries that I have not seen that probably would be stronger contenders. I would
Yeah,
guess.
and to sort of like take a little bit of a step back, unlike in the best picture, in the sort of in the acting zone, where the Sundance is there, it's present. It's really strong in documentaries. So there's 16 documentaries starting going back to 1991. 16 that won the best documentary were at Sundance. Were either 12 of them were premieres, and then 4 of them were sort of either American premieres or just were distributed there. There's 2 or 3 more that got Sundance, like a Sundance grant to be made, but wasn't part of the festival. So it's now the terrifying reality of 1991 being like what 30 something years back, but like more than half of the documentaries that have won best picture best documentary were have come out of Sundance. So just American Dream was the first one, 1991. Other winners are When We Were Kings, March of the Penguins, An Inconvenient Truth, Man on Wire, The Cove, Searching for Sugar Man, and 20 Feet from Stardom. And then recently Summer of Soul and Navalny were not premieres there, but I think it was their American premieres were at Sundance. And there's 2 nominees this year, 20 Days in Mariupol. I apologize again for the Ukrainians this time for mispronouncing, as well as The Eternal Memory. So I think the 20 Days is the favorite right now. I could be wrong, but like, they might get another one. So there's a strong kind of history of Sundance documentaries coming through. So I do feel like Daughters, as mentioned earlier, like leaving the festival again. We didn't see it. I didn't see it. Doesn't so I don't really know, but that was the one that had the most buzz. That feels like it might hang around for a while. And I know we've talked about like celebrity documentaries maybe don't get Academy consideration as much. But the other one I did hear about was Will and Harper, which is about Will Ferrell and one of his oldest friends who recently transitioned is now a woman, and like sort of them going on, I think, a road trip, and Will Ferrell like kind of it's a documentary sort of about him being like, these are people that I generally we're just like, great, like that's good. I support the community, but I've never really interacted with them or thought about them or really knew their stories. So it's a celebrity documentary, but it's about like this big hot button issue that's happening right now. So I could see that being something that gets the like, whoa, we'd have Will Ferrell on stage and not just doing a bit to present, maybe. And also like, we're not just being like Will Ferrell, a life, but it's about this important issue that,
it's not a
is worth
celebrity
highlighting.
biopic. It's a issues documentary. Yeah. Exactly. I can see that. Oh, so the thing that I was looking up as you were talking is that Daughters is a Netflix movie. Got bought by Netflix. And so, Netflix usually has kind of been cornering the documentary market for a few years now, I want to say. And they also have another one called Ibelin. Did you see this anywhere? Like descriptions of it? Do you know what this movie is?
Yes, but it was sort of on the margins of people being like, and there was also this movie that I didn't put it in the notes, but I did see some.
So the premise of this is that there's a man who had a muscular disorder, and I'm probably getting that wrong. And after he passed away, he gave his World of Warcraft password to his parents.
Oh, yes.
And so the movie is sort of following the rich online life that he had through the World of Warcraft. And like on paper, that doesn't really sound like it would be a very good documentary. Like I feel bad saying that, but just like the description of that, I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds like a cool idea, but not like an Oscar, like an awards contender type documentary. Right. But so many critics. So I think Sean Fennessy on The Big Picture lost his mind over this documentary and was like, this totally changed the way I thought about gamers and about online communities and stuff like that. So apparently it's very powerful, and he's not the only one. Like I think several critics on podcasts that I regularly listen to were really highlighting this film in ways that I didn't expect. And so that's a sneaky one that might get in there because it seems to be kind of the unexpected breakout documentary. Because people are like, every time I hear someone saying something good about it, they were like, "Yeah, I was really like," almost like they were surprised. You know what I mean?
It was about World of Warcraft, but I liked it.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah, I don't know.
Maybe time for people to finally revisit Duncan Jones's 2016, 17 movie Warcraft, which
No.
I had a good time with. I've got no problem with Warcraft. I like that movie. I'm easy to please. Take everything I said earlier with a grain of salt. I like the Warcraft movie. So yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready to watch it
I,
again.
you know, as the spouse of a former Blizzard employee, I have no comment. I don't
Okay.
like,
The NDAs might extend that far.
I don't know.
Um, I will note two things. I'm realizing when I was pulling things together, not that this isn't super important, and we're at the very end here, but I didn't actually pull up last year's. I kept looking at 2022 and thinking that was last year. I'm not in. We're a month in, and I'm not into a 2024 headspace yet. I did forget two of the special jury prizes last year. One that was great, one that's just sad. The ensemble cast. You know what? I'll do the sad one first. Creative Vision dramatic special jury prize. The creative team of Magazine Dreams. A movie we'll never see. A movie you're the only one who will ever
A
see.
movie I've seen,
Yeah,
and
you're the only one who'll ever see it. Because it's never going to come out. It's never going to be released. It'll be dumped in like a decade. It'll be a little Day the Clown.
will it even be that? I don't know. Like, I feel like they're gonna lock that up in a vault somewhere. So for those of you who are like, what are you talking about right now? A movie that premiered at Sundance last year called Magazine Dreams starred Jonathan Majors. He was an early front runner in Best Actor.
Yes.
Do you remember this? People were really buzzing.
I mean, it could have been him versus Cillian Murphy. He could have been the Paul Giamatti.
What a world we would have been living in. That's so crazy. And obviously, since the the conviction of Jonathan Majors and how that's all panning out, right, means that is it Searchlight? I can't remember who had the movie.
I think it was Searchlight. Yeah.
Yeah, Searchlight had announced that we're pulling the movie from their slate indefinitely, right? And I think the last news was that it was technically for sale. Like they were
Yes.
They were like, does anyone want this? Like, we don't want it. And so it might, it's very possible it might not.
The rights have returned to the filmmakers, and they can shop for other distributors.
Oh, I see.
So
that's.
I also heard everyone saying it's not like finished, or like it didn't work in its current form, and might need to be it
needed another edit.
Right. Yeah. So it's also a weird, like, it needs money to get to a point where people thought it would be good, and the reason to complete it is this incredible central acting performance that now is awkward at best, and I think like super gross at worst.
Yeah, and if the movie had been about something else, there would have been hope, but because the character Jonathan Majors plays is hyper aggressive and violent and troubled, it's like they just can't. It's just not. Yeah, it's a non-starter. There's no way to save that movie, I think, which is too bad, because I think the director, I believe it was I can't remember, his directorial debut, and it was like, as a directorial debut is really good. It was still like, there are a lot of good things about that movie, also problems, but like, now it's just like, there's one problem it has, and we can't overcome it. So like, it's just really, it's too bad, because I know lots of people worked on that film that don't deserve to have no one see it. So like, it's just, it's tough. I don't know.
Sell it to Ridley Scott. Call Christopher Plummer back from the dead. We can fix this. I believe in Ridley. He can do it.
Jonathan Majors is in like 98% of the movie. Like, he is the movie. It's like a one-man show. It's like, you don't understand. This is like, there's no way to save this movie.
Okay. Well, on a happier note, to close this out, the last year, 2023, the U.S. Dramatic Special Jury Award for an ensemble cast went to the cast of Theater Camp. How lovely. What a great time. So see, there's good with the bad in terms of the legacy of Sundance festivals.
That's good. I'm glad we ended there. All right. I think that's enough Sundance talk. PT, if folks want to find us, where can they find and follow the show?
They can find the show, as I mentioned earlier, on Instagram or Threads at the Long Take Review. I will try to actually remember to put posts on Threads as well as Instagram when doing things. But follow us there, and you'll see some content. You can also email us the Long Take Review at gmail.com. You could follow me on Letterboxd. That's the best place to see where I'm actually active. PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF on Letterboxd, and you can check the tags on any of my reviews or Jen's reviews for LTR Pod. Click through that tag, and hopefully, if you set the right settings, you'll be able to see all the reviews from us long take reviewers that we've done in the last, at least since the year began.
Yes, you might need to click a couple times, I think is what I figured out. You have to, there's tabs. There are tabs involved. Yes. The default is to show your own tagged reviews, and that's it. And then you get
or just it's just the tagged reviews of the tag where you clicked it. So if I clicked on your a tag on your review, it'll just show me your tagged LTR reviews. See. And so you got to do the menu to say show me everyone.
Yeah.
And then it will show everyone's.
Okay.
Let's explain this every time. I think that's good podcasting at the end of 2 hours.
Well, nice people only tune into certain episodes, so I don't know.
That's true.
And you can you can find me on Letterboxd. Sorry, I was teaching all day today, so my voice is apparently shot. You can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen, and you can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI. I think that's a wrap. On Sundance,
we've Sundanced into the sunset.
I did title this episode "Sundance the Night Away" because I still everyone's still got Barbie on the brain. So yeah, there we go.
People are still mad that song didn't get nominated. Anyway,
we can't get into that right now. That's for another episode, which I'm sure we'll have that conversation at some point in the future. All right, thanks, BT. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks, Jen. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.